Hello everybody, I am Azam and today I'm talking about double authentication preventing signatures in the standard model. This is a joint work with Dario Catalano, Georg Fuchsbauer and Azam Soleimanian. In this talk, I'm using DAPS as the abbreviation for double authentication preventing signature. What is DAPS? It's a kind of signature scheme which means that it can guarantee the authenticity and the integrity of the message, and it works like this. Once the key are generated, signer can sign messages and the verification can be done only by knowing the verification key. Well, it's the kind of signature scheme, but what is the main difference between DAPS and a usual digital signature? Here, the signer is somehow restricted. In a usual digital signature, as far as the message is in the right message space, the signer can sign as many messages that she or he wants. But this is not the case in DAPS. But what do I mean exactly by this restriction and where putting this restriction can be useful? I would answer this question by the next applications. Imagine that there is a certificate authority who issues certificates for different domains. A certificate is simply a signature generated by this authority over a message of two parts. The first part of the message is the name of the domain, and the second part of the message is the public key of this domain. Now, what would happen if a kind of national court who has jurisdiction power over this authority ask for another certificate for the same domain but different public keys? Well, obviously, someone who has access to this second certificate can impersonate the domain and get access to all its private communications. The next application is in cryptocurrency. In cryptocurrency, a transaction is simply a signature of the sender, generated by the sender, over a message of two parts. The first part is the serial number of the coin, and the second part is the receiver of the coin. And what would happen if a sender signed the same coin for two different receivers? This is called double spending, which is really dangerous and definitely should be avoided. Well, so far we have learned that DAPS is a kind of signature scheme, and in DAPS message has two parts: address part and the second part, which we call payload. And what we would like to have in DAPS is this nice logical relationship saying that if a signer is trying to sign two messages with the same address but different payloads, known as compromising pair, then the signer would be penalized. How? It would be possible for others to extract information about the signing key. But how the revelation, the extraction of the signing key can help? For example, in our cryptocurrency application, at the beginning of the session, a deposit is created and every participant puts a special amount of wealth in this deposit, which is locked by the signing key. And there is also a smart contract saying that everybody who has access to the signing key can retrieve the values from the deposit at the end of the session. Now, if double spending has happened, the signing key of the malicious signer sender would be revealed, and so everybody can go and get access to the values of this malicious sender. I am not sure that we have moved an elephant like this, but to be much more realistic, here is what we have done in this paper. We have designed a DAPS construction, general DAPS construction, which can support an exponentially large address space. It is also secure in untrusted setup where the malicious signer also can generate the keys. And it is in a standard model, which means that there is no random oracle assumption. We also have generalized some definition to be more realistic. And finally, we give a concrete instantiation for our general construction. There are many information on this slide, but all I want you to know here is that comparing to the previous works, in most of the previous works, they are in a random oracle model, and the one which are in the standard model, they just can support an small address space, or they are just secure in the trusted setup where the key are generated honestly. And in this paper we have presented two, and you can say three construction which are in the standard model, no random oracle, and one of them even is secure in untrusted setup. From this point, I would start a little bit more technically. As we saw, syntactically, DAPS is similar, and actually it should be similar to digital signature, but it also includes an extra algorithm called extractor, which can extract a signing key given a compromising pair. And in the sense of security notion, we have two security notion: unforgeability, which is against outside attacker, and key extractability, which is against malicious signer. In the unforgeability game, the adversary that I have shown by A here has oracle access to the signing algorithm. It means that it can simply send a message and receive signatures. To avoid trivial cases, there is also this restriction over the queries, saying that the adversary cannot ask for the compromising pair. Why? Because then by the extractor, the adversary can extract the signing key and simply do a forgery. And the aim of the adversary here is to do a forgery, which means that he tries to output a pair of a message and its signature for a new message. In the key extractability game, we consider two setups: trusted setup and untrusted setup. In a trusted setup, the keys are generated by the honestly, while in untrusted setup, the adversary can also generate the key. And here, the adversary actually is the malicious signer. So the aim of the adversary is to generate a compromising pair, the same address, different payload, where no information about its signing key would be revealed, which means that the extractor fails. To build our construction, we need these two building blocks: vector commitment and double chapter chameleon hash function, which I may just call it double chameleon hash function. What is a vector commitment? It's a commitment scheme where you can commit to a sequence or a vector instead of a single value, and later you can open it to a specific position. The nice point about vector commitments is that the commitment and its opening do not depend on the length of this vector that you are committing to. And in the sense of security notion, it says that the commitment cannot be open to two different values in the same position. And what is double chameleon hash? It's a collision resistant hash function with two trapdoors, where given one of the trapdoors, you can find collision efficiently. So basically it is hard to find collision unless you have one of the trapdoors. And in the sense of security notion, there are three main security requirements. The first one is called collision resistant and might be a little bit different from what you know as collision resistant. And it says that given one of the trapdoors, it is hard to find the other trapdoor. Key extractability is, it says that from a collision you can extract one of the trapdoors. And collisions are uniform, which means that given a collision, it's hard to say if it was generated by the first trapdoor or by the second trapdoor. Now that we have the required ingredients, let's go to the rest of the recipe. Here I would give you a big picture of our construction. Our construction is a tree-based signature scheme, and in fact it is a flat tree structure, which means that the arity of the tree might be larger than 2, and the nice point property here is that the flatter the tree is, the shorter is the signature size. The value of the root is fixed as the verification key. When you want to sign a message A and P, by the address A, you would find the position of the leaf, and then you would go through this path to the root, and you would assign some values to these edges depending on P. And finally, the signature would be the concatenation of all these values in this over this path. Slightly more in detail, how we generate the verification key in the root. Here it's similar to the Merkle tree. When you compute the hash of the parent, for the parent you compute the hash of the children, but using a hash function may not be the best way in signature scheme. Why? Because to make the verification possible, you have to add the value of the children to the signature. Here instead we are using vector commitment, where we know that the commitment and opening do not depend to the length of the vector, which is the arity of the tree here. What I want you to remember from this slide is that the vector commitment is there for the sake of efficiency, while it is still possible to use a hash function, collision resistance hash function. Okay, we commit to the value of the children, but at this stage there is no value in the children. What we would do is that we just consider some random values, whatever, and then compute the double Catalano hash function of these randoms, which we call mi, and you simply commit to these mi's. It might seem a little bit strange that we are using random values here, but thanks to the property of double Catalano hash, we can relate this randomness to the message that we are signing later. So when you start to sign a message, you start from a leaf, you go through a path, and at some point you visit a node that you already have visited, and some double Catalano hash value is already assigned to this node. Here is what miracle happens, and you can connect your new path to the previous chain by the property of double Catalano hash. In fact, as the signer, you know the trapdoor for double Catalano hash, so you just use it to find a collision in this point, and then you connect the path to the previous, to the existing chain. This was the general idea of the construction. But why this construction should be secure? All is because the value in the root is fixed as the verification key, and also the way that we generated the verification key. Now we are sure that when you try to sign a message, definitely there would be a collision point on the path. And even if this is the first message that you're signing, there would be a collision in one of the children of the root, because of the way that we generated verification key. We already have visited this node, so there's a collision. But key extractability of DAPS is saying that the extractor fails to get to extract information from this collision, which means that this is a collision, kind of collision for vector commitment, and that's why the extractor fails. You cannot extract any information. Or this is a collision for a double Catalano hash function without revealing any information about this trapdoor, which breaks the security of this primitive. And in unforgeability proof, this collision would be translated to a collision for vector commitment, breaking the security of this primitive, or a collision for double Catalano hash, which breaks the collision resistance of double Catalano hash. This is not so trivial, and that's why I try to make it more clear here. For the reduction, the adversary of collision resistance, the attacker to the collision resistance of double Catalano hash, is given one of the trapdoor, and its aim is to find the other trapdoor. By this trapdoor, it can simulate the signatures for the adversary to the unforgeability game, and then when it finds a collision, it uses the extractor to extract the other trapdoor. But why and how we can be sure that with good probability this trapdoor is the other trapdoor and it's not the same as the given trapdoor? The reason is because collisions are uniform and we have no clue that if it was generated by the first trapdoor or the second trapdoor. So when you extract a trapdoor with a good probability, it is the one that you are searching for. And how we instantiate these building blocks? For the vector commitment, we are using the instantiation of Catalano Fiore, which is based on the CDH assumption, so totally standard. And for double Camelon hash function, we present our own instantiation. And the main advantage of our construction comparing with the previous construction of double Camelon hash is that it is secure against untrusted setup. And the underlying idea is also quite simple, saying that one equation, one unknown, you can solve the equation. Actually, when we were looking at the previous construction, we noted that the evaluation of the hash is a single equation involved with two trapdoors, which means that given a collision by malicious signer, let's say, it's not possible to extract the trapdoor. Why? Because you have one equation, two unknown. There is no extractor for that. So we tried to have two equations in the evaluation of a hash, and actually the construction is like this. Let h0 and h1 be Camelon hash functions, which means that they just have single trapdoors, and this kind of hash function, they already exist, and we are just using them as building blocks here. And what we are doing here is just we simply put these two Camelon hash function over each other. So we have two equations and each of them is involved directly with one of the trapdoors, and that's why you can extract the trapdoor from a collision. And these Camelon hash functions are already instantiated based on discrete logarithm assumption, which means that our construction also is based on this assumption. So one of the building blocks, which is double Camelon hash, is secure against untrusted setup. But unfortunately, there is no vector commitment scheme which is secure in this setup. So how we can have DAPS to be secure in such setup? You may not like this answer, but what we are doing here, to solve the problem, we erase the source of the problem, which means that we replace vector commitment with the standard collision resistant hash function. And as you probably remember, at the beginning of the construction, I emphasized that this vector commitment is there for the sake of efficiency, while it was still possible to use hash function with the cost of longer signature. And yes, we need to improve the efficiency of DAPS in the standard model. There already exist some DAPS schemes in the random oracle model which are quite efficient, but we would like to have this efficiency in the standard model also, and especially in untrusted setup, because as we saw, we replaced vector commitment with hash function, which was the source of inefficiency there. And a natural question here is that is it possible to have a vector commitment scheme which is secure against untrusted setup? And we also talked about two main applications of DAPS. it would be nice to think if there are more potential applications or not. And that's it from me. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have found this topic interesting, and don't hesitate to contact me if you are interested to discuss.